Welcome back to TK Tennis and the review for Yonex Poly Tour Pro. In all the years that I've been playing tennis and playing with so many different strings over the years, never mind all the string reviews I've been doing since I started this channel about a year and a half ago. For whatever reason, I've actually never used Poly Tour Pro, so this was really surprising, and I want to thank UC for buying me a coffee or buying me a string. He wanted me to test Poly Tour Strike, but he contributed enough that I decided to go ahead and get Poly Tour Pro before testing Poly Tour Strike, because why not? You have to use the flagship product or the flagship string, in this case from Yanx, which is Poly Tour Pro, which is used by many top level pros. I think Casper Ruud uses at least it is in a hybrid or a blend setup. You have TFO that uses it and many other pros. So I thought it was really important to review Poly Tour Pro first before I get to Poly Tour Strike. And if you like these reviews and you'd like to help contribute, since I do buy these strings with my own personal funds, if you contribute to the buy me a coffee or buy me a string and you put a recommendation on what string you'd like me to test, I can't guarantee that I will be able to get to it. It depends on the string. I want it to be, of course, a string that people are interested in hearing about. But if I can do it, I certainly will. And you don't have to buy me a whole set of string. If you just like these videos and you want to contribute $2 or $4 to help me pay for the strings and these videos, that would be awesome. So let's get to the point and get into the review itself with Poly Tour Pro. So this was a Jekyll and Hyde string, and which blew me away, more so than any other of the sort of pro level strings or the popular strings that many pros use. So this is Yonex Poly Tour Pro. I tested it. Of course, it's a round string in yellow and 1.25 millimeter gauge with at 50 pounds of tension, like I do for all my string reviews, sort of right in the middle of soft and firm. And jumping into the characteristics. So let's talk about snapback. It was very clear in terms of snapback right from the first 5 or 10 minutes after I was warming up, playing with it, that I found, even when the string was new, that the snapback, while it felt fast, like on the stringing machine and you move the strings, it felt like it would return fast and it was fairly slick. The strings stayed out of place much more than I expected them to for a polyester string, even when they were new. So when they were really fresh, they returned for the most part back to their normal position. But I would notice, especially on the cross strings, and I'll throw up a video here so you can see it for yourself. So these are all straight, but the crosses are not returning, not snapping back like you'd expect. But the main strings are good. So, I mean, that's more important for spin generation. I just don't know why the crosses are. See this one here moving out of place a little, this one here, and after about 20 minutes of hitting, that the cross strings strangely weren't snapping back, where it's usually the main strings that do most of the snapping back or not snapping back, but it was the cross strings. So I found snapback to be actually fast when it did snap back, so not hyper fast, but also really inconsistent, which was surprising knowing how popular this string is. Moving on to grip and spin potential, I give it a sort of normal. It's a round poly. It has decent grip. Some shaped polys may have a little bit more grip, but that doesn't necessarily mean you get more spin. And if you watch some of my other videos, you know that I prefer round polys. I think they're more predictable for the most part, and just their accuracy is more predictable, and their lateral and vertical trajectory seems to be slightly more predictable than a shaped string, particularly if it's a 4 or 5-sided shaped string. But the gripper spin was sort of normal for that round poly. Moving on to power, which is not something I ever make a big deal out of. Everyone wants to think spin and power when it comes to strings, but if you're chasing spin and power with your strings, you're chasing the wrong thing. Spin and power comes from yourself, comes from the stiffness of your racket and your play style. If you're chasing spin and power with strings, like I said, I really think you're chasing the wrong thing. That's not what you should be really looking for in strings. You should be looking for feel, consistency, predictability, tension maintenance, value, and mostly feel, right? That's really what we care about in terms of strings, feel, and predictability. So when it comes to power, it gets that normal level of power. It had a nice plush feeling to it, but it gets the normal power. It didn't have any extra power. It didn't seem light on power for most polys. Like I said, most of them get a normal, and this does as well. Moving on to accuracy. This was the part that was sort of Jekyll and Hyde again. When the strings were new and they were fresh, the accuracy was reliable. Not particularly overly reliable. That's why I have it marked as halfway reliable. And that's pretty much when they were fresh. And what do I mean by fresh? I mean like the first hour, no more than an hour of clear, firm hitting. They would start to get inconsistent. And as they wore, say 2, 3, 4 hours, they actually became really erratic. Again, which was super surprising knowing how popular the string is, but I'll get to that in a minute on why I think that is. So accuracy when it was worn was erratic and inconsistent, and only reliable when the strings were fresh. Moving on to durability. Pretty much average, got me about 7 hours before the strings broke, and let me tell you, I wanted these strings to break much sooner because they got soft. I really did not enjoy playing with these strings whatsoever after about the 2.5, 3 hour mark. And it was really hard to continue playing with these strings. And that might be because I am overly sensitive since I test so many strings. Maybe I'm overly sensitive and maybe you won't feel the same thing. But I do play a lot of tennis and I'm sensitive to string setups. And when it came to the durability, I just really wanted them to break a lot sooner. Tension maintenance was poor, like exceptionally poor. There are many other strings that have poor tension maintenance, or many other polys, such as Alu Power, such as Head Hawk Touch, and a lot of those sort of like pro level strings again, but this was the worst out of all of them. Tension maintenance was horrid on this string. It was strangely bad. Like after an hour of playing with these strings, you could feel the tension maintenance just completely starting to go away, which again blew me away because I just did not expect it, knowing how popular these strings are. I figured they have to be really good, and I was really excited to use them and play with them, but it was bad. That's all I can say. So what does the feel like? The feel is thumpy, so it has a nice acoustic to it when you hit the ball well, especially when the strings are fresh. It has a thumpy feel to it, but as they wear, they also are plush, sort of in the stiffness rating, which I'll get to in a second. So they got a plush feel, a softer feel, which again, for that string that was very popular across pros, Alu Power, Head Hawk Touch, Poly Tour Pro, this one was the most plush. A lot of pro level strings like Alu Power and Head Hawk Touch, when they're fresh, they have a really crisp feeling, and they're not so much the sort of softer end of the poly like these are. So again, surprising. I expected them to be more on the caliber of Alu Power and others, but these were really unique in that sense that they were on the softer side. And of course, when they were worn, after 2 hours, after an hour and a half, they started to really get spongy and really unpredictable in terms of where I could place the ball. And then coming back to stiffness feel, I give it a 3 out of 10, which is an area that I like. Like if it's in between 3 and 6, that's what I like. And this is a subjective feeling since I test so many strings. If you get to a 7 or higher, like Kirschbaum Black Shark, which is probably like an 8 or 9, anything above a 6, 7 to 10 is harsh. You get the stiffness of 7 to 10, and what you feel with your body, it starts to feel harsh. If it goes below a 3, it gets a little too mushy and soft. And I think there was only one, which was Head Lynx Touch, which I didn't formally review, but I played with. That was like a 1 or a 2. My favorite string, or one of my favorite strings, is Kirschbaum Super Smash or Kirschbaum Orange, as many people who watch my videos know. That also gets a 3 out of 10 in terms of stiffness feel when the strings are new. So I like that stiffness feel when I'm looking for a softer, comfortable string. These fit the bill for softer and comfortable strings. But I also like strings that are sort of like that sweet spot of 5 out of 10 or even 6 out of 10 when I want something a little bit more crisp. So anything between 3, in short, anything between 3 and 6 is great, just depending on what your preference is. So these get a 3 out of 10. Now I will note for something in terms of what the strings, I was really impressed with something about Poly Tour Pro, and that was touch. There's no doubt in terms of touch, like hitting drop shots and hitting soft touch volleys. These were the best polys I've ever played with when it comes to touch. And I think that might have something to do with pro level players using these strings, particularly when they're new, which was really unique because most polys, I don't get a very big window or variations in terms of touch and feel, but Poly Tour Pro, without a doubt. I don't know what it is. You know, sometimes when you hit a touch shot, even if you hit with a sort of aggressive underspin for like a drop shot, you wouldn't expect these strings to perform that well because the snapback is not very good or it's erratic. But it didn't make a difference when it came to anything touch related, even like slice backhands and so forth, where you're not highly aggressive with your swing speeds. The touch was fantastic. By far the best poly strings I've ever tested in terms of touch. So that was the really big bright spot with these strings, was control on the touch shots was like no other poly I've used in the past. So let's move on to final grades. Final grades, and I had to do this based on, are the strings brand new and fresh or are they worn? Because it didn't make any sense to do it any other way since these are sort of Jekyll and Hyde strings. So performance when they're new, if you're an intermediate player, so 3.0, 3.5, up to 4.0, I give it an A. For advanced players, an A-, and for high caliber players, also an A-. Like, who am I to say that these aren't A strings when the strings are fresh, knowing how many top level, high caliber pros use these strings? When they're fresh, they perform really well and they play really well. And that's why I think people use them. And again, high caliber players or professional players, they don't care about the longevity of a string or the tension maintenance because they're generally using a string for no more than an hour. And if they're playing matches, it's less than that, maybe a half an hour at the most. So maybe they don't care. And that's also very similar to some other strings that many pros use that have poor tension maintenance. They use them often, but they're getting 6 rackets strung every single day, so they don't care. But when the strings are worn, which most people aren't cutting out strings, most recreational players aren't stringing that often, that's where it really matters for most people and recreational players. So in that intermediate level, I give it a D. For an advanced level players, I give it a D. And for high caliber players, I give it a D. Just short of an F, because when they're worn, they're probably the worst polyester strings, or one of the worst polyester strings I've ever played with when they are worn, and they just get progressively worse. It's not like they wear out and they play a little bit worse and they pretty much hold their tension maintenance. They just keep getting worse. My wife even used one of my rackets because she broke a string and had to use one of my rackets, which she can switch back and forth the rackets no problem. And she immediately said, and I didn't tell her anything about the strings, but she started spraying balls all over the place, which validated my thoughts on the string because I just couldn't believe how erratic she was hitting the ball when the strings. She used it probably when they were about 5 hours, had about 5 hours of time spent on them. So in terms of value, I give it an F because they're $20 for a set in the States. And I just can't see any recreational player who values performance and longevity in terms of value spending $20 a set of string. So who is it for? Well, if you haven't figured it out by now, it's for players who want a nice acoustically sounding string that is comfortable, and it is comfortable. And it is the best touch-oriented poly I've ever played with. And if you are not concerned with frequent stringing or price, it's probably okay for you. But it's obvious why used by many top touring pros, as it provides exceptional feel and predictability for a round poly, but only when the string is fresh. I'm really interested to hear other people's comments because I know the string is so popular. It's a really nice looking string. It sounds good. It has great touch, but in every other category, for me, it fails miserably. And again, I would say, most of my string reviews are very nuanced, and people seem to like the nuance breakdown, and a lot of variations between polys aren't that dramatic. But with this one, it's about as dramatic as it gets. So that's my thoughts on it. I'd love to see what other people think. Maybe they don't have that same sort of feeling. Maybe they do. I think most people in the tennis world that play with a lot of different strings know that Poly Tour Pro has a history of having very bad tension maintenance. So I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. But maybe some people will think differently about some of the other things I had to say about it. So disappointed would be an understatement. I'm excited to move to Poly Tour Strike now that I have a really good baseline how these strings played for Yonex. Now I can go to Poly Tour Strike, what UC asked me to test, and have a much better understanding of the line of strings by Yonex. That's my thoughts. If you like these videos, please remember to like and subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I will see you in the next ace.